What the West is trying to erase is a world civilization that was Great Barbary or Tartary. The real barbarians are not those who have been insulted by savages or barbarians because they live in harmony with nature and refuse slavery of Western elite or capitalism, but the real savages are the capitalists who have destroyed civilizations and entire peoples and have destroyed everything in the world, have razed the forests transforming them into desert, and have destroyed everything like a virus or armies of locusts which destroy everything on their way. Algeria with Albania was once the most powerful navy in the world with more than 10,000 boats, and of course against money ensured the security of maritime transport, and therefore the Great Barbarian or the Algerian navy did not live on piracy but charged the passage of its territorial waters or protected the ports of Holland or Norway against remuneration as America does today with NATO. The countries belonging to NATO must pay an annual contribution to the United States of America. And so Algeria and Albania or the Empire of Great Barbary had the largest cannons in the world and advanced technology and free energy and steam engines. Algeria was not a Turkish colony, but on the contrary the Algerian sailors with Albanians and Macedonians ensured the protection of Turkey and the Ottoman Empire. During the capture of Algiers, the city of 1,000 cannons, France, and the Rothschilds and the bankers Sieler as well as Schneider got their hands on thousands of cannons and thousands of plans for very advanced steam or free energy machines. All this thanks to the Army of Africa, so Senegalese and German soldiers. France colonized Algiers thanks also to the infiltration of Freemasonry in the Ottoman Empire. After Schneider himself became a manufacturer of cannons and a manufacturer of steam engines and railways thanks to steel and technologies stolen in Algeria. The giant guns of Algeria were transported to France and Europe to protect the French or English coasts. More than 200,000 guns were stolen and were shared between the imperialist powers, a third for France, a third for the England and America, and the rest between European powers like Belgium. These guns are today with the Invalides in Paris, in the Norman or Breton forts, or at Mont Saint-Michel for example. Baba Mirzog was absolutely not the largest cannon in Algeria, but there were much more gigantic ones which were sometimes cut out in Algeria and were recast to serve the French and English or American Industrial Revolution. There was at least one cannon 150 meters long with shells maybe 7 meters in diameter, but also giant cannons with stone or metal shells 3 meters in diameter that could crush several men. At Mont Saint-Michel in 1980 there were still giant Algerian cannons 14 meters long and others 7 meters long and shells 3 meters in diameter. The famous French writer born in Nantes Jules Verne's may have been inspired by the giant cannons of Algeria, where he stayed mainly in the port of Oran to imagine his novel From the Earth to the Moon, in year 1865. But if in reality Algeria had before 1830 giant cannons capable of reaching the moon, which can explain the existence of lunar craters? Apart from the port of Nantes, London, and some American ports were destroyed during the Barbary Wars between the Barbary Empire and the USA, England and France. Jules Verne's was the precursor of an invention called the space cannon, or this cannon already existed in Algeria before 1830. This imaginary cannon that he describes in his novel entitled, From the Earth to the Moon, 1865. The characters will be projected on the star of the night, in a giant capsule, thanks to a gigantic cannon. This allows us to demonstrate that this idea of a cannon making it possible to orbit objects is very old, and perhaps the Great Tartary had already launched satellites. Later Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, assassinated by the US government, also planned to build a space cannon to launch rockets into space or missiles. Project Babylon is a space cannon project launched by Iraq in 1988, under the leadership of Canadian engineer Gerald Bull. The project ended in 1990 following his assassination and the Gulf War. In the early 1960s, Canadian engineer Gerald Bull floated the idea that giant cannons could be used to launch projectiles containing measuring instruments at high altitudes, at much less cost than a rocket. After beginning the development of a project of this type in Canada, he managed to obtain in 1961 the support of the U.S. Army for what became the HARP project. Several guns were installed from 1962 in Barbados and Yuma, but the U.S. Army put an end to the project in 1967, the results having not been up to par. If the guns actually managed to fire projectiles at very high altitude, the instruments they contained generally did not withstand load factors that were considerably greater with this method than with a rocket, limiting the interest of the project. In the following decades, Bull developed more classic artillery systems, such as the GC-45, but never stopped promoting his space gun concept. He thus seems to have succeeded in convincing the Iraqis to finance a project of this type while he was producing the Alpha self-propelled artillery system for them. At the same time, Bull and the Iraqis were working on a much larger project, System 1000, which, as its name suggests, was to fire a projectile 1000 mm in diameter. Lacking the industrial capacity to produce the weapon's barrel sections, Iraq sourced them from abroad by passing them off as pipeline components. There were also plans for a System 600 and a Babylon project, the purpose of which was to design a guided projectile. On March 22, 1990, Gerald Bull was shot twice in the neck in front of his building in Brussels. Although doubts remain about the real identity of the mastermind, the assassination has been widely attributed to the Mossad. His death put a stop to the project, which was definitively stopped following the defeat of Iraq during the Gulf War. In accordance with the terms of the armistice, the installations and elements related to the Babylon project were then dismantled and destroyed under the supervision of the United Nations. During the First World War, the firing power of a gun of extraordinary size was observed. This one was capable of firing shells at a distance of around 126 kilometers. Its tube had a length of 36 meters and it propelled shells of 104 to 106 kilograms at a speed of 1,600 meters in 1 second. On January 30, 1918, during final tests at the German Navy's firing point, the gun fired up to 126 kilometers with fairly good accuracy. The shells reached an altitude of 42 kilometers at the peak of their trajectory. It was at the time the highest altitude above the surface of the Earth ever reached by a projectile launched by man. This gun spat out 210 mm explosive projectiles. The wear of the tube was such that it had to be replaced after 65 rounds. In order to compensate for the extremely rapid deterioration of the bore of the barrel, widening of the barrel, the shells were numbered from 1 to 65 and had to be fired in sequential order since each projectile had a caliber slightly greater than the previous one. So much so that the caliber of the projectile number 65 actually reached 235 mm. The propellant charge also increased with each shot, increasing from 180 to 200 kilograms with an approximate increase in the impact location of 5 m. The initial plan called for enough replacement tubes to allow the continuous shelling of Paris by 2 guns for a full year. The worn tubes were returned to the manufacturing plants to be repaired and brought back to the original size. This allowed the German army to manufacture only 7 cannon tubes. The Babylon project did not relate exclusively to an orbital vehicle launcher gun, but was also to be used for the development of several types of giant guns of different ranges and calibers. First, a 350 mm prototype was first used as a test bench. This cannon, nicknamed Baby Babylon, was over 53 meters long in 5 sections mounted horizontally on railroad platforms, so as to absorb the recoil of the weapon. In March 1989, the first firing was carried out with the 350 mm prototype. It was a success. At the end of February 1990, in a progress report, Bull wrote, "The horizontal tests of the 350 mm gun can be considered as finished. The tubes will therefore be shipped in the inclined location. Shooting will begin in March." At the beginning of March 1990, the Babylon project is working at full speed. The project is moving at high speed. Bull states in one of its latest progress reports, a projectile design must be prepared for use in the 1000 mm launcher. This projectile will carry 500 kilograms of high-intensity explosives at a distance of 700 kilometers. The 350 mm gun was in fact the prototype of what was to be the true supergun, which would have been 3 times larger. It was a gigantic cannon of 1000 mm caliber and 175 meters long. It was planned to build it in 2 copies. A horizontal test bench was planned to carry out internal ballistic studies, in order to determine the behavior of the projectile in the tube after firing. The operational gun would have been placed at 45 degrees to the mountainside. In its breech, it was planned to use a propellant charge of 10 tons. This space launcher had none of the characteristics of a weapon according to Dr. Cowley, the former collaborator and lifelong friend of Gerald Bull. Charles Murphy believes for his part that the super cannon still had a military application. If a cannon can put a satellite into orbit, it is obvious that it can launch projectiles at a very great distance. Over the past 30 years, Bull has repeatedly prepared studies for the Pentagon on an orbital bomb. This project therefore means that according to Bull, it would have been possible to place a bomb in orbit with the cannon. While being fixed, this machine could have struck any terrestrial objective, provided of course, to have the computers and the technical knowledge to be able to operate with precision the delicate operation of the return to Earth. It seems that Bull and the Iraqis were working on this issue shortly before the project was stopped. In parallel with the development of the space cannon, from the fall of 1989 Gerald Bull and his team of engineers designed 2 other giant cannons. It is quite probable that Great Tartary, the Ottoman Empire or Algeria had giant cannons of maybe 150 m or 300 meters long, and their function was perhaps to launch satellites or to travel in the space. Is the moon really 380,000 kilometers from the Earth, and if the moon was actually 70 kilometers from the Earth, or why not 40 kilometers, it might be possible to reach the moon with a giant cannon or reach the moon with helium balloons.